Everyone for joining us today. For those that don't know me, my name is Angie Jones. I'm director of the Family Business Center at the University of Toledo. Today we have this is our third kind of in a little series that we've come up with on PPP, and today we'll be discussing forgiveness and all the good stuff. I know there's been a lot of questions around this topic. So if you haven't joined one of our webinars before, I think we are on number 8 or 9. They come so fast. I know we just put this one together on Monday, and here we are today, 2 days later. And I know things might even be changing, so we might be doing another one of these next week. But if you haven't been to one of our webinars before, how we operate is there at the bottom of the screen. If you kind of hover over, there's a chat box. If you could open up the chat box, we'll have our presenters today share information on the topic, and then any questions you have, go ahead and put them in the chat feature, and then I will ask them. Or if you hover over participants, you can find your name, and there's a raise my hand feature. If you have a question that's a little more in depth, go ahead and use that, and then I'll call on you. Or if I see your question has a lot of parts to it in the chat box, or it might be something you want some back and forth discussion, I will go ahead and call on you and ask you to unmute. So you'll notice that as you entered, everyone is muted. If you happen to get unmuted, please go back and remute it, or Emily will do that for you, so that it just really helps with the background noise and we can focus on the content. So our speakers today are Mike Camp with William Vaughan Company, sponsor of the center, and also other sponsor Tom Wiggins with Raymond. So we're really excited. We've got a lot of content to go through, and I know you are going to have a ton of good questions. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and I'll ask the presenters to say a few words about themselves and their company as they go. So we're going to start with Mike. He'll give some content, some information, and then we'll go to Tom, and then we'll have time for questions and answers afterwards. So go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Angie. Appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. My name is Mike Camp. I'm a tax partner at William Vaughan here in Toledo. What Tom and I have kind of talked through is both of us have some slides we're going to walk through as the actual forgiveness application has come out. We've gotten a little bit of clarity. Some might know that there's a lot of talk going on in the Senate right now that a lot of this might be changing as we speak. But we're going to go through where the rules stand right now. We've got some slides. I think our intention is to go just a little bit fast on the slides, so we make sure that we have enough time for a question, questions. So please feel free to kind of fill up that chat group as far as questions as we go here. And Angie, if you happen to see questions that you think are really relevant to the slide, please just kind of pause and we'll answer them.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. All right, does it look right?
It looks great.
Perfect, thank you. So when you go through the application itself, it's really trying to get us down to what is the actual forgiveness amount. And when you think about the forgiveness, there's really this bucket of eligible cost that the forgiveness is going to be based on. And when you think about the total eligible cost, a lot of the directions really drive you to put those costs into one of two buckets. One bucket being payroll cost, and the other bucket being eligible non-payroll cost. So then, I need to move this out of my way here. So as you have your total eligible cost, that's kind of step one. Step two, you have to go through and you have to calculate a couple of limitations. So the first limitation is of the forgiveness amount, no more than 25% of the forgiveness amount can be towards the non-payroll costs. So if you take your payroll that you've spent during the 56 days, divide that by 75%, that's going to get you to the total eligible forgiveness kind of to maintain that ratio, right? Second item is you take your total eligible cost, and we'll go into some more detail a couple slides later, but there's a reduction that you can have if you reduced your wages during the during the 56 days as compared to pre-COVID-19. There's also a reduction that if you reduce your FTEs during the 56 days as compared to pre-COVID-19, right? So total eligible cost minus this wage reduction, minus a FTE reduction, if you have any, kind of gets you to this modified potential forgiveness. Step 3 is you then take the 3 numbers that you've really come up with, right? This payroll 75% requirement, which is just the payroll divided by 75, the PPP loan itself, and then this modified potential forgiveness. And what you are going to, the forgiveness amount is going to be the lowest of all 3 of these numbers. So we can't be forgiven more than the PPP loan itself. We have to meet the 75 or the 25% requirement for non-payroll cost. And then we have to take into account the wage reduction and the FTE reduction. So let's talk a little bit more about the payroll cost. And so in the application, there's actually a brand new concept that is introduced. I've got another slide here that will kind of hopefully give you more of a mental picture as far as what they're trying to get at here. But is the covered period, or what's called the alternative payroll covered period. So from the very beginning, it was worded as though our 56 days, the 8 weeks, started the day that we received the PPP funds. That is still true, and that's called the covered period. There's also just an administrative practicality as it relates to payroll, that we have payroll that's typically on a given cycle. If your payroll is biweekly or paid more frequently. So unfortunately, if you pay your payroll twice a month, the alternate payroll covered period is not available to you. But if you pay your payroll every 2 weeks or more frequently, then you can choose this alternative payroll covered period. And basically what it is you get to not, as opposed to starting the day that you get funded, you start the first day of your next payroll cycle. And as I said, I've got a slide here that will kind of go through that. As it relates to payroll, and we'll probably have a couple questions as it relates to bonus and hazard pay and things of that nature. One thing to always keep in mind is that within the 8 weeks, we are always governed by this $100,000 annualized limit. So in no cases can a forgiveness amount for an individual go over $15,385 for the cash compensation during that 8-week period of time. It is based upon gross pay. So if you pay somebody $5,000, but their actual check is only $4,000 or $3,000 because of a bunch of withholdings, it is that $5,000 gross pay that should be included in the calculation. There's this cash compensation, but then there's also benefits that we get to include. So company paid health insurance and company paid retirement contributions. And then just a little bit of a carve out here, specifically your state or city taxes based on income is the verbiage. SUTA is kind of the most common. So state unemployment tax that you get to include in the cost also. For an employee that makes $100,000 a year and you pay $1,000 a month for healthcare, you're going to have this $15,385 plus $2,000 more for the healthcare that you pay for every month. So you're actually going to have $17,385 for that employee. That same exact fact pattern for a owner, you do not get to take the additional health insurance cost. The owners themselves, and that doesn't matter whether it's a C Corp, S Corp, partnership, Scheduled C, self-employed person, no matter what the tax structure, if you're an owner, you are capped off at that $15,385. You don't get to include anything above that. So I'll open up both of these here. Here's the slide I was referring to that tries to kind of cover this alternative, I guess, payroll cover period. I know there's a lot going on the slide, but there's honestly just a lot going on with kind of this concept. So if you look at the portion of the slide on the left, we got our loan on May 6th. So if you notice on May 6th, we got that blue circle. That really represents when the 50 days start. And so as we go through the calculation here, we got our 56 days that starts on May 6th, ends on June 30th. So then we have these payrolls on the 14th, 28th, 11th, and 25th that fall nice and neat within our payroll period. When you work through the instructions, you're going to end up having within your 8-week period of time, 9 weeks plus 2 days actually qualify for forgiveness. There's this concept of what's paid during the 56 days, but then also what's paid, what's incurred during the 56 days, and then paid the first payroll cycle after. So when you work through all those kind of mathematics on this kind of theoretical company that pays every 2 weeks, you get 9 weeks and 2 days based upon a loan that started on May 6th. If we say, no, we don't want to start our 56 days on May 6th, our next payroll cycle starts on May 11th. So let's go ahead and start our 56 days on May 11th. So we just make that election. You don't have to notify the SBA. It's just, you just do it in your calculation. You're just at liberty to choose whichever way you want to calculate it. Then if you go through the same exact kind of instructions and whatnot, you end up including that last pay period, you end up including the entire last week. So as opposed to getting 9 weeks plus 2 days forgiven within the 56 days, you get a full 10 weeks forgiven within the 56 days. So definitely something to play around with based upon your exact fact and circumstances to see which way is better for you. So now if we talk a little bit about the eligible non-payroll cost. So we have this covered period versus an alternative payroll covered period. For payroll, the eligible non-payroll cost does not have that same concept. So if you're funded on May 6th, the 56 days starts on May 6th. For non-payroll cost, that's governed by the 56 days. There is not any option for that. So what is included in this, right? So we got mortgage interest on real personal property. So I don't know why they put the word mortgage in there. Still trying to figure out what exactly mortgage interest on personal property is, but everybody's understanding that to mean it is on equipment loans, right? So we have our, so we've got our interest on our building, land and whatnot, but also if we have a bunch of equipment loans out there, we can take the interest on the equipment loans also. Rent on real and personal property. So same kind of concept. We get the rent on our building. We also, if we have a bunch of equipment, be it fixed equipment at the plant or be it vehicles, we would get the rent on that equipment also. And then utilities. So utilities is a bit of a broader definition. It's not just your gas and electric. It is, as per the instructions, electricity, gas, water, transportation, telephone, or internet. A lot of people are considering it's a bit vague, but right now, if you have a fleet of trucks and you have to put a bunch of fuel in those trucks, that is a utility for that business. One of the kind of governing requirements is all these agreements have to be put in place or have to have been in place as of February 15th to qualify for the forgiveness calculation. So let's talk a little bit about this wage reduction. And there's a lot of confusion here. There's this wage reduction and an FTE for, reduction. The wage reduction has this 25% threshold. The FTE reduction, it does not. So if the salary wage reduction was greater than 25%, then it starts to result in a reduction of your forgiveness. Now, when we talk about this greater than 25%, you get to compare it to, you got to compare your 56 days to a prior period of time. So for the wage reduction, that prior period of time is essentially first quarter of 2020. So compare first quarter 2020 wages for a person compared to those wages during the 56 days. And if there's a reduction of greater than 25%, then you need to reduce what you're going to be forgiven on your PPP loan. If an individual is earning greater than $100,000, essentially they're excluded from this calculation. So if somebody was making 120 and you reduced them down to 100 during the 56 days, that does not impact this calculation. So it's only individuals that are making less than $100,000 in 2019 that you need to worry about this calculation for. And also another bit of a confusing, or I guess confusing item out there is this June 30th restoration date that we we're told that, be it the wage reduction and the FTE reduction, if we restore those by June 30th, then it's not going to result in a reduction in the forgiveness amount. That is true, but there's an except for, right? So the reduction had to occur between February 15th and April 26th for it to be eligible for this June 30th curing rule. A little bit of a nuance there. If the reduction didn't happen within that window of time, then the June 30th cure concept is not relevant to you.
Hey, Mike, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is it, does it have to be a written lease or can it be an oral agreement?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our position is it should be a written lease. You're going to have to prove it to the bank. You're going to have to prove it to the SBA. And a lot of times you have like related party, right? So you own an operating entity and then the same owners own a building. And under that scenario, there's just so much opportunity, right, to kind of struggle. Well, do you have a history of making payments? What did you base the lease on? So you're going to be in kind of, in my opinion, dangerous water if you really don't have a written lease. Now, if you had a written lease, but had a long history of a steady payment stream, every single month you paid a certain amount, then I think I'd still prefer to have a written lease. But at least if you had a history of a payment, I'd go ahead and include that and just let the banker know. But I go ahead and include that in there. So step one is written lease. Step two is no written lease, but you are making a monthly amount. I go ahead and include the monthly amount. Step three, you don't have a written lease. You haven't been making a monthly amount and you'd like to start making a monthly amount. I just think it's too risky to start making a monthly amount.
Yeah, okay. A few other questions that came in before we move on, if that's okay. So
Yeah.
if the owner doesn't make $15,385 in that 8-week period, can they take the healthcare deduction?
So the way that it is currently worded, it basically says that the owners do not get the non-cash. So no, the owners are limited to what their historical pay has been. And if it's not $15,385, it's still just limited to what it is. But the non-cash compensation rules are excluded from the owners. So no.
Okay.
Tom, have you seen anything different on that?
Hey, Mike, no, that would be correct.
Okay.
Okay. So
It's
no.
kind of illogical, right? It's just penalizing the owners without much rationale.
Okay. So for health insurance paid on owners of an S Corp, can this amount not be used then toward the payroll figure?
That is correct. If they're an owner, and there doesn't seem to be any sort of like some of the healthcare and other rules, you got to be a 2% owner. There's some sort of threshold, right? Within this law, there is no threshold. An owner, in theory, if you are a 0.001% owner of an S Corp, your healthcare costs do not count for the PPP loan.
Okay. And then for employers on a semi-monthly pay cycle, is it necessary to pull out part of the payroll based on the covered period?
I guess maybe I'm not quite following the pull it out. So you are not eligible for the alternative payroll period. And so whenever you get funded, your 56 days starts, you would have that first pay within that period, within your 56 days, likely would include days from before the 56 days, which is perfectly fine. Then when you get to the end of the 56 days, if you had, I don't know, 8 out of 15 days included in that last, incurred in the 56 days, but not yet paid, and as long as you paid it in that next payroll cycle, then you would get 8/15 of that next payroll that you would then include in your 56 days. So it is this concept of paid during the 56 days plus the amounts that were incurred during the 56, as long as they were paid in the next payroll cycle. Hopefully that answered that.
Okay. And then a few more. Owners can receive bonuses towards payroll forgiveness. Is that correct?
As long as you don't go over the 15,385. Yep.
Okay, good. And then one last one, and then we can move on. What's the time frame on when you have to apply for forgiveness? Or will that be coming up in a future slide?
Yeah, there's all kinds of different dates out there. It's either 60 or 90 days. I don't recall which. Is it 60 that you have to apply and then the SBA is 90 to respond? Tom, do you happen to know that off the top of your head?
Yeah, Mike. Yeah, actually, we just had a conversation about that this morning. There doesn't appear, Mike, you probably heard, remember at one time there was like this 21 day after the June 30th, after your forgiveness period. That was early on in this guidance. That's kind of gone away. So there's really no time to apply with the bank. The bank will direct. But Mike, to your point, once the bank receives it, they have 60 days to review the application, approve it, send it to the SBA, and the SBA has 90 days then for final approval. At that point is what our understanding is currently.
There's no statutory limit on applying for forgiveness, but then the SBA has 60 to get back.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yep. So.
Okay. So one last question on a previous slide, Mike. On the application table 1, what can you define covered period? What does that mean?
The covered period is the 58 weeks or 56 days that starts the day you receive your PPP funding and ends 56 days later. That is the covered period for both payroll cost and non-payroll cost.
Okay.
All righty.
Okay.
So then we kind of covered this wage reduction. Now we'll kind of just cover a little bit on this FTE reduction here. So FTE is a full-time equivalent. In the beginning, everybody was thinking the FTE was going to be based upon 30 hours a week. They did change that. An FTE is 40 hours per week. There is no 25% threshold on the FTE. A lot of questions I've been getting kind of would show that there's a lot of confusion here. The wage reduction has a 25% threshold. The FTE does not. It is a straight up math. If you had 10 FTEs and now you got 9.9 FTEs, you're going to have that 1% reduction in your loan forgiveness as far as comparing money spent versus money actually going to be forgiven. There is an election to kind of do it a little bit of a simplified way, that basically anybody 40 and over, you count as a 1.0. Anybody that is under 40, you count as 0.5. So like 0.10 or 10 hours would be 0.25. Under the simplified method, that same person would be 0.5. The instructions kind of walk you through that a little bit. That's kind of your opportunity to do the math a little bit differently. But it really is just a straight up full-time equivalent. Now here, and I mean, we can give the dates later if in a question we kind of really want the dates, but there's actually several different periods of time that you get to elect. You compare your FTEs during the 56 days to the FTEs during these other periods of time that you get to elect, and you kind of compare that math. And if it's 80%, 90%, whatever percentage, all the way up to 100%, it's just that straight math. Same thing on that June 30th cure concept. If the FTE reductions occurred between 2/15 and 4/26, and you restore them by June 30th, then that will not count against you. However, if the reductions didn't occur between 2/15 and 4/26, that June 30th cure is not relevant. All righty. Tom, I believe this is where we were going to hand the baton off. Is that correct?
Yes, that sounds good to me. So I will share my screen. As well. Give it a second here to catch up. All right. Yeah. So Mike, great job. Really well explained. And again, my name's Tom Wiggins. I'm with Raymond. So we are an accounting, wealth management, outsourcing firm established back in 1944. We are in Michigan, Ohio, and Florida. We got about 900 associates. So thank you so much for the opportunity. I hope everyone is safe and healthy and opening back up in Ohio, which is certainly ahead of other states. There's a picture of me, which kind of looks like how Mike looks now, dark hair, young looking, so you can tell that was a long time ago, and need to update mine. All right, so to continue with where Mike left off on, kind of taking the next step in terms of forgiveness calculation. So we kind of gathered all the data, and so what does this forgiveness calculation look like? One strategy is looking at your retirement costs to get to that 75% threshold. Depending where you are in the process, some of our clients are struggling to get to that 75% for a number of reasons. There might be an opportunity to increase your retirement contributions during that 8-week period in terms of your profit sharing or company match. So that'd be something you want to look through your plan document with your third-party administrator, your consultant on your retirement plan to see if that might be an option to kind of fund some more. Mike had talked about the non-payroll costs in this 8 weeks that you can kind of squeeze out, maybe another week or two for that utility bill. So that certainly will help. Hazard paying bonuses, was within the last week or so, provided some guidance that for those employees that you want to reward, for going to work, you include hazard pay. You can also have these bonuses. Again, Mike talked a lot about this $15,385 threshold through those 8 weeks. You can't exceed that amount. So you just want to be careful and not bonus, too much. It should be reasonable, as well. And then finally, a lot with FTE reduction. That's probably, as Mike mentioned, it's been really challenging. A lot of calculations, and one opportunity is that if you made a good faith effort to hire back an employee, and employee's like, I don't want to come back to work, then if you send a letter to the employee signs the letter, sends it back that they do not want to come back to work, then you will not be penalized for that employee for your FTE calculation. And Mike had discussed, right now there's some Senate negotiations about ready to vote based on the House on updating the PPP program, and there's going to be more flexibility with those FTE calculation as well for employees that don't come back, want reduced hours. So there's more to come on that. So again, provide more flexibility for business owners.
Tom, can I ask a quick question on that?
Sure.
How do you calculate the FTEs? Is it average through the covered period, or is it how many hours they had a certain week or the week of 630?
Yeah, kind of all the above. Unfortunately, a lot of moving parts. So, right, they have a baseline period of there's kind of like two calculations, right? The 2/15 of 2019 through 6/30 2019. You take kind of the average monthly FTE count, and also you can look at January 1 through February 29th of 2020. Say take the average amount, you compare the two, you can take the lower of, and then you can also, in terms of that calc, Mike had mentioned, that spreadsheet of you're going to count half an FTE or a full FTE as well. So you can use that method, or the safe harbor where you're looking at hard dates of February 15th, April 26th, and June 30th. So it's kind of looking at all those and see what gives you the best number to get to that full FTE where there's no forgiveness.
Okay, what if they were part-time prior to the covered period?
Part-time. Let's see. They would still, I know you include them. Mike, how have you used that? I know on the half the FT calculation, I guess we'd still include that as part of the cover period of what.
Yeah. I think once you pick your period, you have to use the same methodology with both periods.
Right.
So if you're using the simplified, you've got to use it in both. If you're using the straight up math, you got to use it in both. So if they were part-time before the 56 days and then you bumped them up to full-time in the 56 days, that's actually going to end up helping you as a forgiveness calc. I know Raymond has an actual calculator out there. We have an actual calculator out there. These are great questions, so please keep them coming. I do encourage you, get your hands on a calculator, if nothing else, for the FTE and the weight reduction, some of these haircuts, and go through those calculators, and they'll really help you kind of in the step-by-step process working through it.
Right. Yeah, great point, Mike. And I think, the whole idea is you want to have a count, and you want that account to hopefully go back up at the end of the period to where you were. So great questions. Let's see. So what questions have been answered? Again, as more guidance has come out over the last couple of weeks, no prepayments. You're really looking at that 8-week, 56 days period. So you can't, prepay your August, September, and October rent, or go back to January's rent. It's all within that 56-week period. You don't have to recertify when you send in your application for forgiveness. You did that as a business owner at the time of your application with the bank. The bank accepted it, and you move on. No need to recertify. And if you're under $2 million, you're safe harbored, which means you're not going to be audited, and pretty much, it's up to you if you're going to repay or that process. There's not going to be any audits or any other requirements as well. And then application requires you have to maintain certain documentation. When you submit the application, there'll be some documentation you need to send, and then there'll be supporting documentation you don't need to send with your application, but you want to keep for your records. And here it says 6 years. And I'll go through some of the documentation that's needed, especially, there's that question about, if it's an oral agreement or you need a written lease. So, things of how to track the forgiveness. A number of different ways that are options. There's no set way that you need to do it, but some potential solutions. One, that you would set up a separate account to track your expenses. They come out of that account. So if you receive your PPP loan proceeds, they go in one account, and then you pay your payroll, non-payroll out of that, so you can track. Or you could set up a general account ledger as well for these tracking purposes. You have class or project designation. So there's a lot of different ways, especially from an accounting perspective, if it makes it easier to track these funds and not, commingle with everything else, which you certainly can do. At the end of the day, you just have to be able to track it and show the bank what the funds were for in terms of forgiveness. And then, spending, how do I track? And Mike did a good lead in there that, both firms, a lot of firms out there have these tracking spreadsheets, which I know, Mike, I looked at yours, and yours is pretty similar to ours. I think we had 8 or 9 tabs of data to track. And I have a couple of them. They really didn't share too well on the screen. So that's my lack of expertise on Zoom and creating slides from Excel spreadsheets. So a learning opportunity for me. So if you can see here on this slide, this is tracking all the expenses. So you have your payroll, and then your group health insurance, dental, vision, which is part of the group health insurance, group retirement contributions, match, safe harbor, profit sharing, cash balance plan, state unemployment, utilities that we have already discussed. And at the end, you can't see, but it actually would track the 75-25% rule. So as you filled up each bucket, that 75-25 would adjust down. And then at the bottom, there'd be a table. So just a good tool. And I'm sure many companies kind of have their own tracking tools, but this is a good way to help if you don't have anything at this point. And then this is actually the Schedule A of the actual PPP loan application forgiveness, where you're taking information from, I said, the other 6 or 7 tabs that would be there, and start loading this. And you can see from the Schedule A, if you go to line 1, you enter in your cash compensation. Line 2 is your FTE. And then if you go down to line 6, non-cash compensation with the group health insurance, retirement plans. And then if you go down to line 11, we start looking at FTE again. So this is kind of gathering all the information on this Schedule A. And then from the Schedule A, it moves to actual loan forgiveness calculation that is provided by the SBA. So it takes all this information, it condenses it basically into 11 lines. Taking your payroll, non-payroll costs there, you see line 1. And then line 5 is adjustments. Mike had mentioned that 25% salary, or actually earning wage, hourly wage reduction. So you're going to take that out. Line 7 looks at that FTE. So you did all this calculation for FTE. You really wanted it at 1, because that means that you've hired back people that had not started at that time or were laid off. And then it goes through the calculation, and it tells you your forgiveness amount. So this is all what the actual application looks like. All right, we talk about supporting documentation as well. So all of this is copied right off the application, forgiveness application. So for payroll, you want, bank account statements to third-party payroll service. Absolutely, your payroll service is going to have a very important part in this process in terms of, documenting your payroll and be able to submit those payroll documents to your bank for forgiveness. And from my understanding, they've all done a really good job of tracking this. Two, you have tax forms as well for the periods, and then payroll tax filings such as Form 941 as well. So this is all the documentation, and we'll certainly preface that by, the bank is going to really determine what you need to provide them, but all these forms here are going to definitely, I think, be required for the bank to be able to match that payroll. For group healthcare benefits, again, you're going to look at any canceled checks, statements, from the healthcare companies verifying payment. Retirement benefits, the same. Third-party administrator that receives the deposits for the contributions, statements, state unemployment taxes, the quarterly business wage reporting filings as well. Non-payroll, big business mortgage interest, property, or personal property. Need to really show that all these non-payroll costs were in effect as of February 15th of 2020. So you would need, copies of your amortization schedule, that the loan was in effect, as well as any payments, canceled checks, ACHs. Business rent or lease payments, again, same information. Just prove that it's there and payments are being made. Utility payments, again, canceled checks, account statements as well. So, in considerations when you kind of go through this process, what do you think about, well, what if employees can't come back to work? We had touched, on that as some options to document to not be penalized for forgiveness. New legislation might make that a little bit easier based on what we see at this point. FTE tests, again, there's a lot of different combinations. It's real important. And it's kind of a double negative whammy or impact, because if you don't hire as many employees, then your payroll costs are lower, which means your forgiveness amount is going to be higher. So if there's any way to try and reach that 6/30 deadline as of now to ramp up that hiring will certainly help. Pull work ahead, obviously, to have more people working, as well as any projects. And then when you look at the loan forgiveness, you look at, when, for example, if you're in Michigan, we just started opening up literally this week. Ohio's been earlier. So it kind of depends where you are in your business cycle of how quickly you'll be able to have employees come back to work and be at, capacity. You can use the dollar. So if June 30th comes and goes, you haven't used all the monies, you can still convert that loan and use it in the same capacity. So let's be that 75-25 ratio. However, they are looking at potentially 60-40 ratio from there. And it converts to a loan, 24 months at 1% interest. Pretty cheap money from that perspective as well. And that is all I have at this point. I think we ran through that pretty quickly. And Mike, did you want to touch anything on your slides or open up the Q&A?
Yeah, I think with the timing, why don't we open up for the Q&A?
Okay. Great, because I've got a lot of questions here. So if someone resigns during the covered period, does that result in a forgiveness reduction?
As long as they goes on their own to a leave, it does not. So if you fire them for cause, their leave on their own accord, it does not count against you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's I should say there's three. If you look at the application, they have like three scenarios, right? They leave on their own, terminate, or part-time. That does provide forgiveness relief. You just want to make sure you document it. You just want to make sure that you talk to HR, maybe even an attorney, because the guidelines are that you really have to be pretty sensitive and careful about just firing, so it's not COVID related or other issues, just like any other type of HR type issue that might be there.
Okay. And what if the 2019 taxes were completed during the shutdown? Can 2019 bonuses be paid using PPP as long as it doesn't exceed the 15,385, over the 8 weeks, or do bonuses need to occur during the 8 weeks?
Silence. So Mike, do you have?
Well, Tom, this might be an item that we're reading the instructions slightly differently. Just based on one of the slides that you had gone over, we're reading the instructions that say things are paid during the 56-day period, and items that are incurred during the 56-day period, as long as they're paid in the next payroll cycle, are included. So interpretation would be, yes, these bonuses, even though the bonuses were incurred in 19, as long as they're paid in the 56 days and don't exceed the 15,385, our interpretation would be those are included, or those are includable. You had made a comment to say that the payroll from like prior periods or rent from prior periods, and I know we're kind of hinging on like an and or an or, right? So
yeah, exactly.
we're certainly not English majors, right? We didn't become accountants because of our English ability.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That is, I noticed, on your payroll, that's probably the difference interpretation. And we've been going back and forth kind of within the firm that we're kind of using that 56 days as a hard 56 days. You can't go back. It's within, kind of that period. And I guess my question on the 2019, I guess if they took the deduction, if their taxes are completed, so they already took the deduction in 19, and then they're going to pay out the bonus. I guess that's where it gets a little confusing. How that would work. So I guess it's just a matter of interpretation, as Mike said.
Okay.
Yeah, I do believe that the bankers are going to do everything they can to try and help us out in this process. Everybody gets to make their own decision as far as how they go through the process. My recommendation and what I would do for myself is things that are a bit unclear, I'd include them in the calculation, and I let the bank or the SBA tell me no. Obviously, that has some risk to it, but just what it's worth, that's what I would do.
Right. Yeah, I think that's definitely reasonable. Just document it. Just be upfront with the banker. This is what you did, and again, they have the final say of what they're going to forgive. So.
Okay. All right. So, what if most of the employees are part-time? Can they still receive bonuses?
Sure.
Okay. And then can you have a PPP and an economic impact loan?
Yeah, for the idle, they have to be separate. You can't use it for the same cost. So you can't use idle for payroll and then use PPP for payroll. And actually, the first 10,000 of the idle comes off the PPP as well.
Are employer contributions to retirement plans forgiven for all employees, including the owners?
Not including the owners. So for the other employees, yes, but not including the owners.
Okay, and then we might have covered this, but just a clarification, when does someone need to hit the 40 hours, or is it an average?
So it's really not a necessity that somebody hits the 40 hours. It's just once they hit 40 hours, they're if you're thinking about this FTE calculation, like kind of visualizing a spreadsheet, once they hit 40 hours, they're going to be a 1.0 in that spreadsheet. And you just can't go above 1.0. So if somebody works 50 hours a week, it's not a 1.25 or anything. So once they hit 40, you're just a 1.0. But as far as somebody needing to hit that 40, as I'm reading that question, potentially I guess the question is coming from a different angle as far as like timing. The guidance that I've seen written out there would basically say when you're calculating this, you calculate it on a pay period basis. So if you pay people once a week, or pay people every 2 weeks, pay people twice a month, that how you pay your individuals governs how you calculate that FTE. So your period of time that you're looking at to calculate the FTE is governed by the actual payroll cycle. Tom, is that how you're reading it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. I think for the 8 weeks, like if you had the spreadsheet, right, you'd be putting in their salary, and then the number of hours they're working that
Yep.
week. So if it averages out to 40 hours, again, like I said, can't go above 40. Yeah, I would agree.
But where I think somebody could get unfairly penalized, if they pay everybody every week, and one week somebody works 20 hours, and the very next week they work 60, had they paid them every 2 weeks, that person would be 1.0 in their calculation. Versus since they pay them every week, that person is going to show up as a 0.5 in 1 week and a 0.0 in the next week.
Right.
So essentially be a 0.75 in that calculation. So they're going to get that haircut really unfairly. But yeah, it's governed by how you traditionally have done your payroll.
Right, exactly. Great example.
Okay. And you had mentioned that both companies have forgiveness calculators. I know we have a link to William Vaughn's. If Raymond, if Tom, you could send it to us, or have Connie or someone send it to us, then Kirsten can post them in the chat at the end so everyone has access to that.
Sure. Yeah, be happy to.
So if a company gets their FTE on June 30th to match their FTE that existed on February 14th, does this allow for no reduction in forgiveness?
How far off
yeah.
is that question? I want to try and read that one.
Oh, it was sent privately, but I can.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Or if Tony, you want to jump off mute, and if you want to clarify it, or. Are you there, Tony? All right, I will post that to everyone then, and then you can kind of take a look at that. In the meantime, while you look at that, I put that in the chat. If an employee, well, I think we asked that one. Can you confirm the number 15,385? That's the correct number, right? That we've been talking about, 15,385.
Yeah,
yes,
I
that's
think
correct.
the question is coming from like monthly, right? If you take 100,000 divided by 12, multiplied by 2, you get like a $16,000 number. It is because in the law it's 8 weeks versus 2 months is really the difference there.
Okay. All right. Did that question post? Did you see it?
No, it did not.
Oh, you know why? Because I got to hit enter. There it is. I'm staring at it like, why don't you guys see it?
To match there existed, does that allow for no? Yeah, so you can have reduced forgiveness because you didn't spend at least 75% on payroll. So this question assumes that we don't have a haircut for the 75% rule. And you can also have a haircut because of a wage reduction. So if we do not have if we meet the 75% rule, we don't have a wage reduction, and we're only looking at a potential reduction for FTE, and we get our FTEs on June 30th to match the FTEs that existed on 2/14, yes, then we should not have any reduction in the forgiveness. There's also another caveat to say there's no requirement how long you have to keep the people on the payroll post June 30th. It's just fraught with potential abuse from that standpoint, as far as kind of keeping folks on the payroll post June 30th.
Does the salary reduction apply if they are commission based?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, our thought, as long as the commission rate hasn't changed, then they're fine. Because they are commission, their income, you know, is going to fluctuate and such. But if their commission rate has stayed the same and has not been reduced, kind of like the 25% wage reduction is how we're looking at it, then that's fine. There's no reduction.
Okay. All right, and then I posted another, if you want to take a look at your chat, another situational question about receiving the PPP loan on a specific date for 20, and they have 2 different payroll cycles bi-weekly. I don't know if you can take a look at that.
Yeah. No, I actually haven't had that question as far as a company with 2 different payroll cycles. The way it's worded, it just simply would be what if you get to pick the day you were funded or the first day of the next payroll cycle. It really would just depend upon of the two different payroll cycles. Looks like they have an admin cycle and then maybe like the production workers. So you're saying the production cycle started 4/19 and or biweekly. Well, I guess the cycle started as 4/19 for both. Can we use? So it looks as though maybe May 3rd is the first period of the next payroll cycle. Is that person maybe online that we can get some clarification there?
Yeah, so the first payroll cycle for the biweekly, or the first day of the next biweekly cycle, is 5/3.
Okay.
But the first day of the next weekly cycle is 4/26. So can we use 5/3 so both cycles are aligned? I would use 4/19, but we're a 7-day operation, which means I would lose the 4/19.
Yeah, so the wording actually in the instructions says period that begins on the first day of their first pay period following their PPP loan disbursement date. So I believe you're locked into 4/26. That is the first day of payroll cycle subsequent to getting funded.
Which would be right in the middle of my biweekly cycle.
Right. Yeah, that doesn't, this specific rule doesn't work out very well for you.
Right.
Okay.
Yep,
Thank you.
I'd agree with that, Mike. Yeah, that's a little challenging on that when you have multiple different cycles.
Utilize fund to pay the employee an amount of hours reduced prior.
Well, now you're just taking over my job, Mike. But yes.
All right. I probably should mute. All right, Angie, if you want to read the question, you're a lot better at that than I am.
Yes, no. So the question was, can you utilize funds to pay for an employee the amount of hours reduced prior to when you receive the funds?
And so everyone is hearing Tom and I talk about this, and it does come down to an interpretation. And so when we're reading the instructions for eligible payroll cost, it says borrowers are eligible generally for forgiveness for the payroll cost paid and payroll cost incurred in the 8 weeks. So just to kind of give everybody a little bit of appreciation for kind of when we say the interpretation, if somebody says payroll cost paid and payroll cost incurred, then the way our firm's reading that, we're reading that is two different concepts, right? All the stuff that's paid during the 56 weeks, plus all the stuff that's incurred during the 56 weeks. What Tom's saying is that, well, wait a second, we're hinging way too much on just a simple word here. If as opposed to saying payroll cost paid and payroll cost incurred, if it said payroll cost paid and incurred during the 56 days, then you would really interpret that more as an inclusive concept to say it really has to meet both, right? It's not an or, but it's an and. So I apologize on a video conference that probably didn't make a heck of a lot of sense, but that's really where this nuance is coming in as far as, do you have the interpretation of it being paid and this bucket of cost that's being incurred during the 56 days? If you side with that interpretation, then yeah, you can definitely utilize the funds to pay and basically kind of catch up on some pay, right? They didn't have pay prior to the 56 days. You want to make them whole. You pay them something extra during the 56 days, still limited to the 15,385. But yeah, if you're paying them for prior missed pay during the 56 days, our interpretation would be that that gets to be included. But I also appreciate the fact that, I mean, when you read the words, there's a fork in the road. How do you interpret it? Does it mean it has to be paid and incurred in 56 days? Or is it really referring to two separate buckets of a cost?
Right. And I think to Mike's point, I mean, there's thoughts on both sides. Maybe if there, we consult, I'm sure Mike has as well, with attorneys, differing opinions, which way to go. So I think either way is fine, as long as you as I said, document it and show it to the bank, and maybe there'll be more guidance. But I really can go either way in what you're comfortable with doing and the guidance you're providing.
Yep.
Can you talk about what any potential new legislation looks like?
I'll throw up a quick slide here. Kind of give everybody a bit of a summary as far as what things are looking like. So presently there is a bill that passed the House on May 27th. It is with the Senate. It has quite a bit of support in the Senate. There are 2 Republican senators that as of this morning are kind of pushing back against this 1231 kind of concept. So word was it was kind of a bit perfunctory. It's absolutely going to pass. Seems like it's kind of dialed back from that. We are still very hopeful that it does pass the Senate this week. If anything changes from the House bill, then they'll have to come back in session, and it just would be just a lot longer delay. But if the Senate takes the House bill and runs with it, then here's the changes that are going to be present. The 75% payroll requirement is going to go down to 60%. Now, Rubio is really concerned that the way the 60% rule was written, if you just take it literally, it is a 60% requirement, right? So the 75% is if you don't spend at least 75%, it's a reduction to your forgiveness versus a requirement. So his take or his concern is that the SBA and Treasury could read the 60% and say if somebody spends 58% of their PPP forgiveness on payroll, and they're done. They don't have any more payroll to spend, and so they only spend 58% on payroll, that they get 0 forgiveness. So that's Rubio's big concern. He still is in favor of passing it even with that, because he doesn't believe that that's what the intent, and kind of hopeful that like one of these FAQs that come out will help that. It will increase the 8-week covered period to 24 weeks. The June 30th safe harbor testing that we've been talking about will get extended to 12/31. It's really kind of extending the whole program to 12/31 is what the 2 Republican senators, I think with Wisconsin and Utah maybe, but at any rate. Tom had mentioned this earlier also, as far as really kind of this rehiring leeway kind of for safety standards, trying to free up a little bit of these FTE calculations and everything. An extended repayment period, to be honest with you, I don't know off the top of my head how long that is. Tom, do you know, is that?
Yeah, that's going to go from 2 to 5 years.
2 to 5? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
5. And then allow payroll tax deferral. We really didn't cover this in the session here, but there's a payroll tax deferral. You can take your employer Social Security, so that 6%-ish number, that employer Social Security number, and hang on to that. And then you can hang on to that all the way to 12/31/2020. And whatever you defer, pay half of that 12/31/2021 and half of that 12/31/2022. The original thought was that this payroll tax deferral and the PPP loan were mutually exclusive. You could not do both. They came through with a clarification that said that you can apply for the PPP loan, you can receive the PPP loan, you can spend the PPP loan, you can submit your forgiveness calculation to the SBA and be deferring your payroll taxes, only the employer Social Security portion, but be deferring your payroll taxes all the way to the point that you hear back from the bank that you've been forgiven. As soon as you hear back, you need to stop deferring that. That's the rule that's in place right now. I guess a bit of a nuance that I'm not sure everybody is aware of out there. If the House bill does ultimately go pass, then that point really becomes moot. It doesn't matter, right? You're just simply allowed to defer these payroll taxes all the way up until 12/31/20. Tom, are there other kind of critical changes that you've seen other than just the list that I have here?
Nope. Those are all the changes that we've seen at this time.
Okay. So does the shift from the 8 weeks to the 24 weeks covered mean that they're allowing optional 16 weeks to be or an additional 16 weeks to be covered by the PPP funds, providing that you have funds left?
Yeah, and our expectation with the 15,385 is a product of an 8-week calculation. So the 15,385 would go up also, be based upon a 24-week calculation. All that clarified, but that's our expectation.
Yeah, another potential option is that 8 weeks will just be a moving. You can choose the 8 weeks or 10 weeks or a time period within that 24 as well. So I think there just needs more clarification how that'll work.
Okay. All right, I have a few more questions. We're at our hour, but I want to get these last few ones in. One is regarding commissioned individuals. So if payment was made during the PPP period to a commissioned individual, but it was for commissioned earned previously, so before that period, is it inclusive to the payroll numbers to be reported?
Upon what interpretation you follow.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Our interpretation is yes, it's included.
Okay. All right. And then, let's see, I had one last question. So if a business is not fully operational when they receive the PPP, so thinking maybe like restaurants, will the 8 weeks be extended?
That's what the House bill is trying to do.
Okay.
Right. Yep. Right. And you know, as of now, you still have until 6/30. You can still apply. I mean, they've spent, I think, about 508 billion for the loans. So there's about another 112 billion or so available. So if you have not applied, this is an opportunity to still apply for that loan. And again, maybe the parameters will change beyond 6/30, but it's still an option today. You know, based on maybe this discussion that's helped you make a decision, especially if they, you know, make the terms more favorable as we've walked through, then that will be a great opportunity to take advantage of this loan.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, thank you. So we're at our hour. So I wanted to thank both Tom and Mike so much for your expertise in helping to clarify all these issues. I know we've gotten a lot of wonderful feedback from our members about how nice it is to have trusted advisors, people that have been associated with the Family Business Center for a while and that truly understand our audience. So we very much appreciate that. Kirsten will be putting links in the chat to the forgiveness calculators as well as our social media sites. We did record this session, so if you want to go back and re-review anything or share it with someone that you might find, that you think might find the content good or helpful, it will be on our YouTube site. It does take a little bit of time to render, but Emily Waggy with the center will send out an email to everyone that's registered with the link to our YouTube site as well as the PowerPoint presentations. So we would love for you to go and like and share all of our content. We appreciate that. And if there's any other topics, we've been putting these together relatively quickly, trying to be responsive to our members' needs and what's happening. If there's anything else that we can cover, feel free to drop me an email, Emily or Kirsten. And we, our sponsors have really, I don't want to say stepped up because they've always been there. They've never said no when we've asked, but I know we've asked quite a bit lately, and they're all there for us, providing the expertise, and we're very grateful for that. So anything that you want us to explore, put together a webinar, roundtable, just let us know. Right? And thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Angela. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mike. Great job, buddy.
Likewise.